welcome to this episode of the PA System. On this episode, I'm talking with Dr. Morgan Oakes about the role of spirituality in leadership. So welcome to the show, Morgan.
Yeah, so great to be here again, Pamela.
So wonderful to have you. So I'm excited to talk about this because it's kind of a unique topic, I think, to some people. And this is something that I really sort of want to bring a little bit more awareness to. So before we jump into the topic, though, some people here may not know you. You and I have done a couple of shows together, so I know you, but I would love for them to know more about you. So tell us a little bit about your journey to becoming an entrepreneur yourself.
Yeah, so I started off as a mechanical engineer, and it was like, oh, if you're good at math and science and you like mechanical things, this will be great. So I'm like, okay, yeah, that's me. I'll do that. And when I got into engineering, I realized I didn't want to be stuck in that cubicle my whole life. And so that helped me kind of transition into chiropractic. I had had really tremendous results in chiropractic starting in 8th grade during football season, and had continued doing that through rugby and all these different sports. And so I transitioned into chiropractic. And then as soon as I got into business, because I was really researching while I was in school, and I'm like, well, there's a lot of different ways to go about running a chiropractic business. Not all of them resonated with me. So I'm like, you know what, maybe I should just start my own. So then I got into it. I'm like, oh, I'm super passionate about this, but I'm not a very intelligent entrepreneur. So then really became, the new level of school. I was trying to figure out how do I manage all of this, and really realizing if I don't do a good job of communicating like need and what I can do to support people, then, they're not benefiting because I've done a horrible job explaining how it could positively impact their lives. And it's also a really poor way to run a business. So that kind of forced me onto the entrepreneurship pathway.
Okay, yeah. So how did you sort of navigate that?
Yeah, in the beginning, I was blessed. I had a lot of mentors, so I ended up picking the town I was going to live in. And there were friends I had that are like, they were maybe only a couple miles away. And I was like, hey, is this going to be an issue for you? Like, our friendship's really important. They're like, dude, you can set up across the street. Like, we don't care. So right off, I had these great people that were just non-competitive in that way. And they're like, here's our paperwork, here's our insurance biller, here's the lawyers we work with. Like, any question you have, we've got you. Right. So that's been a nice thing to carry forward, because I think some areas in entrepreneurship can get very cutthroat, or at least not friendly. And these guys were like so giving, so supportive. And so I had mentors, and that really brought me into business, and it got me to that first level. But what I realized was I was doing things very, very different from them in business. And so I was trying to kind of compare apples and oranges. So at a certain point, I got to a level and I'm like, wow, what I really need is help. And so at that point, that got me working directly with coaches. And I always love to say, like, the first 10,000 I spent on a coach, like, I made an extra 60,000 that year in income.
Oh, wow.
Right. I wish all my investments went that well. Right. And so that got me into that place of like, yeah, I need to have specialists in my life that can help me in the areas that I'm really struggling in. And so that kind of set my, kind of my framework and my desire to always be working with somebody to help me level up. And that was, in like 2005 is when I started with them.
I think that's really just a good point for people to kind of understand, is that, just because someone is successful doesn't mean they didn't have a journey to get there, right? And you've had some great successes, but you had to start somewhere too. And so just being open, I think, number one, to the idea of having a coach. I mean, for some people, that's still a hurdle, right? It's kind of like, well, I don't know if I can trust somebody, or how will they really understand? So how did you sort of come to the point of knowing? Of course, you kind of knew these people, it sounds like, but how did you know that they were really the right fit for you as coaches?
So the people I knew were mentors. The
Okay.
people that I ended up hiring as coaches, I didn't know them. And,
Okay.
and I think one thing that's really big is just the ability for us to be honest with ourselves, right? Because if we're honest with ourselves, we know whether we're eating well or not. We know whether we're healthy. We know if our relationship is thriving, flatlining, or dying,
Yeah.
right? We know how our relationship is with our kids. And, if we're really honest with ourselves, that really shows us a roadmap of like, hey, maybe here's an area to apply some focus. And sometimes maybe business coach is not the first place. Like if things are really rough in your mental, emotional life, if there's not
Mm,
a stable home to come home to, like there's no, I don't believe there's really much of a way for a business to thrive in that setting. And so
mm,
if you're honest with yourself and you start seeing where do I need to make improvements. I love that statement of like rising tide lifts all ships. And, for me, if things are off, usually I can go, okay, I'm going to focus on food and fitness,
yeah.
maybe add in meditation. Those three, everything usually gets better. And then I can see, okay, like what's left here? And then I can focus in on that. So I think just being honest with ourselves and then having a level of basically the ability to be vulnerable, right? It
Mm,
requires a lot of vulnerability to say, hey, this isn't going as good as I want it to or as it could be. I need help. So those two
yeah,
things
those are
are a great starting point.
such great points. And it's sometimes it's a little bit hard in our fast-paced society to slow down enough even to have that conversation with ourselves, right?
Yeah.
And to go, okay, wait a second, what isn't working? Or we're afraid to have it because we don't really know we don't know if we want the answer to that question. We don't know if we really want to have to deal with whatever that thing actually is. And so I know that you help people with this. What are some of the ways that we can kind of get beyond those little barriers that stand in our way to really, digging into the things that will help us move forward?
Yeah. I love when you're working with somebody. I think all of us have had this where you're supporting somebody, you're the coach, you're the healer, you're the instructor or teacher,
Right.
and something gets said back to you that you're like paying attention, but you're still on the side, like, I'm going to write that down. That's magic. So I
Mm.
was coaching this woman at one point, and she was talking about her next door neighbor. And she's like, it's almost like she's too busy to succeed.
Oh, wow.
Right. And so anytime people ask us to slow down, like, yeah, why don't you take, 10 minutes and start meditating? It'll probably clean up your mental space.
Mm.
Why don't you take a break every 55 minutes to kind of raise your energy and make sure you're properly hydrated and fed? And I find that people that are so busy that they can't take 5 minutes from this for themselves,
Yeah.
like that's just a really clear sign that things aren't going well.
Yeah.
And so partially we just need the courage and the discipline to like take pauses,
Mm.
and maybe that's meditation in the morning, maybe it's journaling what your goals are for the day, maybe it's journaling at the end of the day, like how did today truly go and what can I change tomorrow to maybe have a better
Mm.
outcome. So some of it's just like adding those pattern interrupts in so that we can make sure that maybe the last hour of the day is as productive as the first hour. And even with that, I don't want to just like talk like big picture. Like one of the things I really like, just so people have more of a takeaway, is if you can set an alarm for every 50 minutes on your phone as you're working, you
Yeah.
know, get up, do some breathing, maybe do some toe touches, some squats, take a walk around, outside for 5 minutes, make sure you're hydrated, and then really, stop and ask your body, like, what do I need? If I'm
Mm.
stressed out, maybe I need to close my eyes and do like a 2-minute meditation. If I'm in low energy, maybe I need to do like some bouncing and breathing and just getting some blood flowing.
Sure.
If I'm hungry, I know that crash in the next hour isn't going to serve me.
Yeah.
Right. So even just taking those little pauses to truly listen and take an objective view of your day, of your life, of your business, that's an amazing starting point. And that'll give us
Mm.
usually more answers than we can even do anything with. But at least it
Right.
it, it lets us know that there's things waiting for us to apply attention to.
Love that. And so then what's our next step? Let's say we've got some answers and we're like, well, I don't really know how to do these things, or I don't really know, maybe we've got more answers than we know what to do with, kind of thing. What's our
Yeah.
next step?
Yeah. I'm a big believer that we can't come up with the question without at least knowing part of the answer.
Mm.
right? So some of us may know, like, yeah, every time I have carbs at lunch, my afternoon's a mess.
Mm,
Or I'm having to work from soda to soda throughout the day.
hmm
Or I keep staying up late at night watching Netflix and then my mornings are a wreck. Like whatever it is, usually there's an immediate, easy answer, and then the next piece that I think is always there, like I mentioned, those friends of mine that they're like, here's everything in our business,
mm,
right? We all have support around us. A lot of times and a lot of times that support around us doesn't realize that we need help. Right? We're all
mm,
so good at putting on this, like, here's my social media facade. How are you? Oh my gosh, I'm doing great. Thank you.
yeah,
How are you?
right.
It's like it's worn, the grooves are worn into the record player,
Yeah.
but if there's an area where you're needing support, like, gosh, who do I know that seems like they have relationship figured out? They're an objective third party for me to talk to.
Mm,
Who does great with energy, and maybe I could start going on walks through the neighborhood with them as part of my fitness, or go to the gym with them.
mm,
Who's
yeah.
doing really well in my business. Maybe I met them at a conference 6 months ago, and they said, hey, if there's anything you ever need, please let me know. Right? How many
Yeah.
times have we heard that and we don't reach out to that? So I think a
Yeah.
lot of times there's 1 or 2 degrees of separation between us and most of the entry points to solutions that we might want.
That's such a great point. I mean, I think that, especially in our society, we're not really taught to receive. And
Mm,
so we're sort of always just, in that like American independence mode,
yeah,
as opposed to what are the resources around me, instead of always being the resource, realizing that sometimes we're going to need those resources too, and that's okay. Like
yeah,
we don't really have to be like no man's an island, right? We don't really have to be pulling ourselves up by our bootstraps. That we really have everything around us that we need if we just can tap into it. And some
yeah,
of that is us being open to receiving those things that are around us, right?
yeah, yeah. And sometimes it takes a little bit of time. There's times I've journaled and went on morning walks for months and months and not come up with an answer.
Mm,
And I also like the idea of being courageous enough to test something.
yeah.
I'm exhausted all the time. What if I go to bed 1 hour earlier for the next week?
Mm,
Like I
hmm
did this at one point. I'm like, I'm going to go from 7 hours a night to 8 hours a night. And it was an interesting experiment because I had to cut out my workout routine, which I didn't want to do. But I just, at that point in my life, I didn't know how to create enough time to fit everything else in. So I'm like, as an experiment, I'm going to cut out my workouts. I'm going to make sure I'm in bed for 8 hours every night. I saw my face change. There was a
mm,
crispness that came back to my mind that I didn't realize it had been missing. Right? It
mm,
was just an experiment. And what
yeah,
I did after that was I moved some other things around. I added the exercise back in. I think I was able to get up to 7.5 hours a night,
right.
until I could shift some other things around. But, we can play with food, we can play with exercise, we can play with what that morning routine looks like. We can think back
Mm,
like, yeah, at the time that you were most productive, most happy, most centered in your life, what were the things that you were doing? And a lot
mm,
of times it's this easy epiphany of like, oh my gosh, like I was doing A, B, C, and what I was also not specifically doing was D, E, and F.
right.
And that's 6 things. But like, I'm going to pick one out of the add them back in, and I'm going to pick one out of the pull them back out of life, and just see how things change in the next week, you know?
Yeah, I really like that. And I think, for someone like me, I have to be sort of, I kind of have to like put myself on a schedule and be really conscientious about it because I tend to be like a little willy-nilly. But when I stick to my schedule, then it's like things run so much smoother. And so, I almost feel like the testing can be like, well, okay, if I'm feeling like, one day just is like really willy nilly, well, what if I let myself have a willy nilly day and just be like, okay, so, this one day, I can just let my schedule be a little bit freer and then go right back to the routine because it's like there's this strength in both.
Yeah. Yeah, and some of the teachers I've really looked up to will talk about literally scheduling, so that's a pretty, like, left brain thing, but you're
Yeah.
scheduling for willy-nilly.
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So you're allowing that peace. And whether we talk about just the way our minds are wired, or if we want to talk about like, does that inner child have a place to play? Or,
Right.
you know, like I'll mix in all sorts of things like, oh, I'm gonna do accounting, which I don't enjoy. But
Yeah.
after that, I'm gonna take 30 minutes and eat my lunch and I'm gonna watch stand-up comedy. And then I'm
Sure.
gonna dive into something else. And like I'll place things in my day so it's playing into my strong suits, but also giving me whatever form of willy-nilly I'm needing to like balance out the equation. Because if we're pushing or resisting something for hours and hours, like, you may as well not even be working sometimes,
Yeah.
right? So if you're going to nap, take a nap. If you're going to
Right.
meditate, meditate. If you're going to work, like dive in and truly knock it out, so
Yeah.
be productive even at being not productive.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And for me, chunking really became helpful in that sense, because it was like, okay, if I know that just this one period of time is something where I have to be super focused on something that I may not be necessarily super excited about, then it's not so bad, because that next period of time I'm like, okay, well, but then I get to do this other thing. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think that's a really great point. So then how then does the kind of spiritual piece come into this for you? I mean, at what point do you kind of go, okay, I'm just going to really kind of like sort of in some ways detach from everything and just be in that spiritual space?
Yeah. It's interesting. I had a little like aha about this even before we jumped online together. And I like that statement of how we do everything is how we do anything.
Mm-hmm.
I think it had that reversed. How we do anything is how
Yeah.
we do everything, right?
Yeah.
And so for me, like spirituality is really one of the most important parts of life. And so I find that I like to do everything in that way,
Yeah.
right? So I will do a centering meditation to start my day. Right. And there's like every time I sit down at my desk to work, I light one special light because I need it. And I light another candle because it feels like, okay, I'm holding this space and time to do
Mm,
this computer work. Like when
yeah.
I'm working with chiropractic people or a coaching client or I'm speaking, all of those things are a different container. And so I open it in a way that's meaningful,
Mm,
which I think is important. You think about like if it's Michael Phelps, swimming a race, he's going to eat certain foods, listen to certain songs. He's got his mental warm up so that
yeah.
his body, mind, and spirit knows it's time to like act like a fish and crush this race.
Yeah.
Right. And for me, I think partially there's that part of like getting yourself familiar to know, okay, I'm here to do this thing.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, it's also part of a spirituality. And I like bringing the things from my spiritual life into my businesses. So even at one point in my chiropractic office, on Mondays, we would pull the files of the people I hadn't seen in quite a while. And we're just like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, like, I hope Jim's doing well. We've really been missing him. I hope his low back is good. And, oh, we haven't seen, Mary in a while. I hope that she's doing well. And we would just actively talk about them and wish them well. And we would put the files away.
Yeah.
And by Friday, anybody that hadn't scheduled or reached out or called us, we would send them an email. And it's funny, a
Mm,
lot of those people would come in and be like, oh my gosh, I've been meaning to be in here for quite a while. And I finally decided to show up. And then the people we would email or call, they'd be like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad you reached out to me. I've been thinking
mm,
about you a lot lately. Right. So it's
yeah.
pretty small. It's not probably the way to base an entire marketing program for a business, but it does feel like a spiritual, like we are all connected and we
Yeah.
truly care for you.
Yeah.
And let's just bring this into the business. And to be honest, it's kind of
Sure.
fun. I love when
Right.
those little miracles happen. You're like, oh yeah,
Yeah.
I'm in a universe that nobody fully understands. Like what an awesome
Right.
gift.
Yeah, and it's funny. I was just thinking about this idea earlier today, which goes back to your phrase exactly, which is that our spirituality really does show up
Hmm.
in everything we do. So just because something feels like maybe it's just a menial task, or there's no big sense of purpose around it, we can still bring our spirituality to it with our own purposefulness,
Yeah.
right? Just with our own mindset around it. and how we approach it, which I think is sort of an interesting concept. I remember a while back, a friend of mine, he was talking about, he does a lot of coaching actually, and he trains a lot of actors and actresses. And he was talking about how he loves to do the dishes because it's just his time to really, be in a space of doing something where he can just focus on that thing that really isn't, super meaningful. It's kind of menial, but he just gets to be present in the moment. And I thought, oh my gosh, I get that. Like I like to do dishes sometimes, literally just for that reason. There's nothing attached to it. There's no big outcome other than the dishes are clean, and nobody's like standing there like applauding you for it. It's literally just you get to be in that moment and just experience being in that moment without really anything else happening. And it's really kind of like a nice centering exercise for me, I guess. And so I like that idea that, like you were saying, it doesn't have to be, you don't have to sit down, with all your candles lit and, your mat just right and all the things. It could be just giving yourself, the awareness around what you're doing. Light one candle and have it there and have that space set for you, and just have that intention around it. So I love that.
Yeah. Well, and I got to say, like, the washing dishes thing is true for me as well. My business, like the inner workings of my business, have never ever been as clean as that
Yes.
sink at the end. Like, there's something so nice about, like, oh, cool, this is a thing that's actually done. So I
Yeah.
totally get that. And it's interesting. I mentioned, accounting is maybe not my favorite thing to be working on in the business, but we all know people that love accounting.
Yeah.
And you and I kind of like off camera, we're talking about the idea of like all these people leaving work, leaving jobs, leaving
Yeah.
industries. And
Yeah.
I think one of the big things that that I notice with that is how do we find like contentment and passion and
Mm,
fulfillment in the little things,
yeah.
and because to be honest, like a lot of jobs you can look at objectively and you're like, that's not fun.
Right.
Right, but I know accountants are like, "Oh my gosh, like, I get to make sure that people are paying for their kids' education. I'm the
Yeah.
person that makes sure there's enough money set aside so they can go to Hawaii," you
Yeah.
know? Like,
Yeah.
they're finding passion within the spreadsheets, right?
Yeah.
Because there's some type of outcome or like, "Yeah, I am just a person that's in front of people when they're returning products that need to get shipped back to the company." And I
Yeah.
get to bring joy and I try to make sure everybody smiles and like
Right.
how do we in this day to day like that saying of like chop wood carry water, right? Like
Mm,
a lot of life is not super exciting and
yeah.
we've come up with this term of like adulting, right?
Yeah.
It's always been adulting for tens of thousands of years,
Right.
but now there's a part of us that I think through social media feels like every moment needs to be selfie or picture worthy,
Yeah.
right? That we're going to come directly into a new industry and make these like Nobel Prize type, shifts in an industry. And
Yeah.
the reality is, a lot of things we just need to find that inner level of satisfaction of like, you know,
Mm,
oh, I got these things done today, or I really helped support this person where they were stuck, or, finding some of those
yeah.
smaller things we can lean into so that we don't have to wait 40 years for a Nobel Prize. Like we can be fulfilled in the little day to day things like washing dishes or whatever we have that's like that within our business.
Yeah. So how do we kind of tap into that part of life? How do we, sort of tap into that side of ourselves that goes, okay, I don't really want to do that thing, but maybe there's some value there. Maybe there's something I can take away from this.
Yeah. It probably goes back to that piece about slowing down,
Mm,
right? Like there's things in my business when I've got 15 things lined up, I don't enjoy them because I'm like, I just need to shove through this because my mind is already 3 projects in the future,
right.
right? And I've had to get excited. This is a great example. I used to really drag my feet on doing auto accident paperwork, for
Sure.
patients.
Yeah.
And partially it's not fun. You have to do a lot more, than you would for like a cash or a health insurance patient. And I would really resist it. And the dumb thing is, like, partially I'm also there to make money, and you make a lot more money on an auto accident. I'm like, why am I begrudging this? And what I realized was, by me not enjoying auto accident paperwork, it meant I didn't enjoy auto accidents, which meant not many of them came into the office.
Mm,
Right. So I
yeah.
think we also be careful what you wish for. You
Right.
just might get it. Right.
I
So
get it. Yeah.
yeah, I think in all these little things, if we can like slow down and go, okay, what is it about this that I enjoy?
Yeah.
Like I do enjoy a spreadsheet when it completely works.
Yeah.
Right. I
Mm,
do enjoy getting all the stuff from last month's, uh, online banking downloaded and put in there and finalized. And I'm like, oh, cool. Like that
yeah.
all worked out good. I'm pleasantly surprised by those numbers, right? Like
Yeah.
finding joy in the little things and slowing down enough that it's not some barrier between you and the rest of your life. Cause you could be sitting in a meditation, like so blissed out, but also impatient because you have stuff to do after meditation. And
Right.
you can feel that way all through work. And then you can
Right.
feel that way at the yoga studio. And
Yeah.
then you could have your beloved, your spouse, your partner, your best friend, your child, your furry baby, your pet right in front of you. And in that moment, you're distracted. You're wanting to just get that time out of the way for the next thing. And so I
Right.
think a lot of it's slow down, be present, and find what you can love about it.
Yeah, it's such a great point. I know there's so many times that I'm like, I need to do my yoga, and 90% of the struggle is getting on the mat,
Yeah.
right? Like,
Yeah.
it's like, yeah, but I needed this and I needed that, and I don't really feel like it, all the things. But also, 99.9% of the time when I get on the mat and I'm there for like 3 or 4 minutes, it doesn't happen instantly, but when I'm there for 3 or 4 minutes, all of a sudden, it starts to kind of settle in and you're like, oh yeah, this is exactly what I needed to do right now.
Yeah. Yeah. The
Yeah.
love affair reignites. Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally. So it's so fascinating what we resist. And it's interesting, even like going in and speaking to companies, right?
Yeah.
Like a big part of my messaging is ultimately like people should be where they're happy.
Mm,
Right.
yeah.
And that doesn't, but the other part of that is like that shouldn't cause a mass exodus, right? Because even if
Yeah.
you think about relationships, oh well, I'm with this person and A, B, and C is happening. Awesome. Break up with them, go get in another relationship, right? Wait the appropriate amount of time, and then the exact same things
Yeah.
will show up again,
Right.
right? Wherever you go, there you are.
There
And
you are.
so, whatever it is that's happening in this job, in this career, in this position, in
Right.
this relationship, in this dynamic with friends or with family members, right? You're the common thing. So, if you can really clean things up and just find the joy in the little things,
Yeah.
I think it's waiting for you. And then once you clean up the mental, emotional, get better productivity and systems and like get things flowing a little bit better, maybe get out of that like fight or flight state that most of
Mm,
us are
yeah.
chronically in. Like
Right.
once that's all gone, then you can go, you know what? Maybe I do truly love this job, or maybe I truly don't love this job, but at least it's from a better place of information, right? The data might
Mm,
actually mean something. And then you get to consciously step and choose, your best life, whatever that looks like.
yeah, that's really good. So I want to go back to something you just said, which is sometimes we need to go through the cleanup process. So what does that look like? I mean, how do we sort of start that? And then, yeah, what do we expect, that process to look like?
Yeah. As you're saying that, it's probably so different for everyone.
Yeah.
There's times where like I'll get, at times I've been so far behind with like to-do lists and business. I'm like, I'm just going to stay up late Saturday night. I'm going to gather all these to-do lists and I'm just going to put them in a box
Mm,
and I'm going to start fresh Monday. And maybe I'll revisit this stuff at the end of the month. Right. And
yeah.
usually you never need to go back. Right. Usually it's
Yeah.
not anything you needed to do. So some of it may be like feng shui around the house, the office. Maybe it's feng shui on your desktop or your computer or your email inbox.
Mm,
Right. It may be something like that. Or it might be like every time, I go to work, I'm stressed out, anxious, angry. right? Like anytime there's a push or a pull away from or towards something, like, oh my gosh, if I don't have this coffee, I can't work. Well, that's
Yeah.
addiction. Oh my gosh, you know, I can't go do this thing because of fear or angst or
Mm,
PTSD or whatever it is. Like anytime there's a push or pull in our life, it's keeping us from being clean,
mm,
right? And
yeah.
so we all know what that feels like. As I'm saying this, a lot of people are probably like, oh yeah, I know where that's occurring in my life. And
Yeah.
then we need to go, okay, what's that about?
Yeah.
Right. And maybe
Right.
it's like, oh, this is an emotional thing because, we had a horrible boss here. And even though they've left, I still am anxious at work. So maybe that's
Hmm.
work with a therapist or a counselor or somebody that does EMDR.
Yeah.
Right. Or it's like, gosh, like I don't feel safe at home because this thing happened in my relationship and we never truly talked about it.
Mm, yeah.
Or I have no clue what it is, but I know this friend of a friend that's a great resource for figuring these types of things out. Sometimes we need a third party because we can get so woven into it. It's like having a kick me sticker on the back of our shirt and we keep getting kicked and we don't know why. Like
Right.
we just can't see it. So,
Yeah.
but whatever it is, I think if we decide to be honest and ask those questions, we'll see some things we can immediately clean out.
Yeah.
We'll see some behaviors we can shift, and that might give us clarity. Or
Right.
it might be enough to go, you know what, I still don't have clarity. Like, who's that, those one or two people that I could reach out to?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I think that's really important. And both you and I obviously are sort of in this world of, of spirituality in terms of our work and what we do. But, even as practitioners, often we need other people, right? Like we can't always get to the root of something ourselves for ourselves. And
yeah,
so we have to find those people that can support us along the way too. And I think that, for anyone out there that maybe has never had someone that they've, gone to, whether it be a therapist or an energy worker or something of that sort, and maybe it feels like, oh well, I don't really know what that would look like, or I don't know what to expect, or what that even means. Then I just want to encourage people, do a little research. Do get on Google. We have this amazing tool called Google now that we didn't have way back when, like when you and I were growing up. You had to go to the
yeah,
library, right? And and do a little research and just get a little curious, like what's out there, what are my options, what could help me with this thing that seems to be getting in my way. Because maybe it's not, maybe you don't need to run out the door to go see somebody or to find a coach or what have you, but you might want to start the process to getting there. And then you can always circle back and go, okay, well, now that I've figured all this out, I think this is the thing that I want to move toward. And who's the person that could offer that to me? And talk to people around, ask friends, have you ever done this thing? Or have you heard of that? Or, what books have you read about this topic? And just get a little curious and figure out, what can I do to support myself with this thing too?
yeah. For me, I feel like, to either settle or plateau, like those are two just like almost like the worst cuss words in my life.
Yeah.
Right. And for me, it's really confusing to see people that, it's like their hand is on the stove and it's actively burning, but they refuse to do something different.
Right.
Right. And so I do like that saying that when, the pain of not doing something becomes greater than the pain of doing it, like people will step into motion.
Right.
And I just always really suggest to people, like, I know there's this momentum that we need to overcome to like get into motion, and I know that sometimes like stepping into a place of pain, whether it's, finances or career or happiness or relationship or health or whatever it is, like it can require a lot of energy to step into it.
Mm-hmm.
And what I've found, and it seems like everybody I talk to, there's this catharsis, right?
Mm,
Like it may require a lot of energy to make that first call or to like show up to that yoga class,
right.
but there's something really magical that happens when you're with the right people
Yeah.
that makes it easier, that makes you so glad that you took that step. A lot of times a massive amount of pressure is lifted off of your chest or your mind. And so, yeah, I really suggest to people that if there's an area in life that either there's a pain point you want to move away from, or there's an area of like passion or joy that you want to move towards,
Mhm.
those are the steps worth making. And those things tend to stick around, right? Like
Mm,
if you don't create positive change, the bad things tend to stick around.
yeah,
And once you do create positive change, it's like that creates a new like up level in your life, like leveling up in a video game. You're like, oh, cool. Now
right.
every time I shoot this, 3 bullets come out or whatever the up level is. And
Yeah,
then from there, there's always another place of growth, right?
right.
Which is what a great thing. Those pieces of growth tend to
Exactly.
get smaller and smaller and more rewarding as well to actually step into.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of like the joy of the journey, right? Because if you're in that stagnant place, you know it. Even if consciously you're not aware that you're stuck in something or even what that thing is, you feel it, right? I mean, it's part of your experience. And so when you start to kind of wiggle free of it, then you have space for joy to come back in. And it's interesting to me that in American culture, we don't really like appreciate that in ways that other cultures do. Maybe we're just kind of like focused on get the job done and go out there and do the thing and make the money, and it's really like this kind of driven masculine energy. And it's like, well, what if we could do some of that, but we could also have some of this other stuff over here that is just fun and just free and just joyful, right?
Yeah.
And have that nice balance.
Yeah. When you were saying that, I was almost thinking about or imagining like just the art that can be brought into things,
Mm,
right? There's a big difference between just making dinner and actually like putting love into it. And maybe there's music playing and there's
um,
laughter and you putting together the exact same dish, but somehow it's more beautiful and
yeah,
it's certainly more nourishing, right? And I think we
right.
can find ways to bring that in all the things that we're doing, you know?
Yeah, it's really good. Well, and it's funny, this last weekend I took a trip and I did a video, and I said, this is something that I've been working on in my own life for a while, which is making more space for me to do things that make me happy. Just, being very intentional about bringing that joy into my life, doing things that I really love, and making that time and space for myself. And this weekend trip was kind of one of those things. Hadn't been camping in a long time. I thought, I'm going to go camping. I'm just going to get out there in the woods, really just have my moments with nature and hug some trees. I did hug a tree while I was on this vacation. I mean, I took a picture of it and everything. So, I mean, just those types of things where we allow ourselves to just kind of disconnect to a little bit from all of the things, because we all have a lot of things, right, to deal with typically on a daily basis. And it can be a lot of stress and it can be a lot of pressure, especially if you're dealing with some of the more serious issues that can come along in life. But I think that's really when we need these things even more, when we need those moments even more, to really just allow ourselves to go, hey, you know what, I'm going to have a human moment and not allow myself, to be superwoman or superman today. I'm just going to go hang out in the woods,
Yeah.
and that's what I'm gonna do. And I'm just gonna be and just let myself have that time. And so to know that that's okay, to have those moments too.
Yeah. Yeah. I think people are probably getting a better version of you this week, maybe than they got last week based on that,
Yes.
right? I think it's really
Yes.
important. Like for me, if I get up at like 6 a.m. and then I'll typically start work at 8 or 9 a.m., depending on the day, like that 2 to 3 hours, it makes all the difference.
Yeah.
Like if I sleep in or hit snooze or don't go to the gym or I don't walk in nature or I don't meditate, like
Right.
the rest of my day is negatively impacted. And the reality is like I really those are the things that are special to me.
Yeah.
I really enjoy those things. So I have to make sure that I sprinkle those things into my life so that I can truly enjoy life, have a life worth living, and also I believe it helps me show up better in all the other aspects of my life.
Yeah, I totally agree. And you bring up a great point with morning routines. And I know this is a conversation that happens frequently, but just I like to remind people, your morning routine is huge. Like it really does make all the difference in your day. Like getting out for 10 minutes for a quick walk, or doing your 5-minute meditation. If you have 5 minutes, then 5 minutes, great.
Mhm.
Whatever you've got, just to have that little bit of time. Or, if you're a reader, maybe you have a book that you love, pick that book up for 5 minutes and let yourself get into the chapter a little bit further. Whatever the thing is that feeds you, that really will help set you up to have the kind of day that you want to have, then do that thing, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And probably most people will find, like, even if you're like, oh, you know what? I don't have a lot of time today. I'm just going to do a 10-minute yoga class
Yeah,
right on YouTube.
right.
Once you do 10 minutes, you're like, actually, I'm going to do 30 or
Yeah,
45 or 60. So for all these little things, if you can do 5 minutes of meditation, you'll probably want more. If you can
yeah,
read your favorite book for 5 minutes, you're probably going to want more. Like
right.
all of these little things, they kind of prime the pump. And then we find ourselves doing more and more of the positive things as well as the necessary things.
Yeah, exactly. Samuel says priceless morning time.
Oh,
Yeah,
yes.
couldn't agree
Yeah.
more. Yeah, and it's fun, I mean, it's fun to sort of play with that too. It doesn't have to be, maybe one day you're like, yeah, I don't know if yoga is a thing. Maybe today I'm just gonna draw, or maybe I'm gonna color in my coloring book, whatever it is.
Yeah.
But just to have that time for you that feeds you, I think is really kind of what it comes down to.
Yeah. And I know for a lot of people, like we do tend to like be super busy in this culture.
Yeah.
And I like multitasking some of those things. I have a buddy I'll call and I'm like, hey, you want to go sit in the river tomorrow morning? So
Mhm.
you know, I'll skip one of my workouts and we'll go sit in the cold river for like 40, 45 minutes, chat, talk about life. So I'm getting some buddy time. I'm getting some Wim Hof time.
Yeah.
When I get home, I'm just as psyched for the day. I'm just as energized. And
Yeah.
so I like the idea of like cross training for the soul.
Oh,
Like
I like
what are
that.
all the little cool things that we need to make sure that we're in balance? And,
Yeah.
and then I think there's again, that piece of honesty, right? If you're skipping the gym to do art because you're just being lazy, that's very different, right? Than
Right.
going, you know what, like this is what I'm really needing today.
Yeah.
And there's times I wake up and I'm like, you know what? Like, yeah, I do want to go to the gym. I do want to work out and I'm a little stressed. Like what I really need is to go walk in nature around this lake, so
Yeah.
trying to be like honest with yourselves to say, hey, what is it I actually need?
Yeah.
What do I need to make sure that everything's in balance, being fed, being acknowledged, being
Right.
supported? So,
Yeah, so good. And I do that fairly often. I mean, it's like, even though I kind of have my routine, it'll be like, yeah, I'm just not feeling the walk. I'm going to do the yoga instead.
yeah,
Or
yeah,
I'm not feeling the yoga. I'm going to have a dance party. Like,
yeah,
mix it up. Right?
yeah, yeah,
It's all
absolutely.
good.
Well, and life's too short, right? Whether
Yeah.
it's, to be honest, and this can sound callous, but it's not. Like life is too short for the wrong relationship,
Mm,
the wrong career, the wrong exercise, the wrong
yeah,
experience of being in your body, the
right.
wrong, a bad experience mentally, emotionally, like,
Right.
whatever it is, like figure out how to be, I always think of the idea of like getting as much juice out of the grape as possible,
Yeah.
right? Like we're
Mm,
making this wine, like let's get as much juice out of this grape as possible
love that.
in whatever that looks like.
Mm, so good. Well, you and I could talk all night.
Yes.
But I think we've given our audience some good nuggets tonight. And I just want to thank you again for being here with me. It's always such a joy to talk with you. Any closing thoughts for the audience before we wrap up?
The universe, like the world around us, is always giving us an opportunity,
Mm,
right? So there's probably, like one or two key things that people heard in this that are like, oh, yeah, this is something I really want to start doing. This is something that I know would really behoove me to stop doing. And
yeah.
if we follow the cues in the world around us, and maybe we change one thing a day, maybe one
Yeah.
little thing a day, like
Mm,
that's what builds a really beautiful life. All the people we
mm,
look up to, the more we look up to them, probably the bigger hurdles they had to go over,
mm,
and so for all of us, if we can just keep paying attention to what's this thing that's going to make life better, my experience of
mm,
this life better, and keep doing those little things, and pretty soon you'll be living in a life that you could have never imagined.
mm. Love that. Well, thank you again. And thank you to all of you out there watching and listening. It was so wonderful to be here with all of you. And if you got something out of this, please share it out. You just never know who needs to hear this message tonight. And we appreciate you. I appreciate you. And I look forward to being with you again here next week. So, with that, good night, everyone.